Hello, and welcome to Itential's Proof of Concept demonstration. I'm Rich Martin, Senior Technical Marketing Engineer. In this demonstration, you'll learn how Itential's automation platform can help your organization achieve and maintain a compliant hybrid infrastructure. Itential's solution simplifies automation for both network and cloud. Our platform enables network teams to connect to all of their infrastructure, whether it's physical, virtual, or cloud, and automate compliance, validation, and remediation across the entire network. Network teams can use our low-code solution to integrate with any IT system and build powerful end-to-end automations. In the first portion of this demo, I'll show how your network team can use automation to ensure that before any requested cloud infrastructure is created, its configuration is validated first in order to verify that it will not violate any compliance standards. By integrating with ServiceNow, I'll show how the automation can be run through a self-service catalog entry to request the deployment of new cloud infrastructure in AWS. This automation runs in the Itential automation platform and will validate the proposed infrastructure request before it's deployed in order to ensure that the VPC and security settings are compliant. Next, it will automate the creation of the new cloud infrastructure, which includes network, security, and compute resources. And the automation will update the ServiceNow request along the way and use Microsoft Teams for notification when the automation has completed. In the second portion of this demo, I'll show how your network team can use automation to ensure that all of their cloud infrastructure will continue to stay in compliance. By integrating with AWS CloudTrail, I'll show how an automation can be used to respond to an event within AWS. In this case, when someone modifies the rules of a VPC's security group. This automation will respond by executing a compliance check against the modified security group to compare its new configuration to the compliance standard. If the changes to the security group violate the current compliance rules, the VPC security group configuration will be remediated, bringing it back into compliance. Our first stop is in Automation Studio, where automations can be built using a low-code interface with easy integration with all of your infrastructure and IT systems. Let's take a look at the main workflow for the first part of this demo. This automation will be used to provision network, security, and compute infrastructure in Amazon Web Services, and will be called externally from ServiceNow. It's important that before any new infrastructure is actually created, the automation checks the proposed infrastructure configuration first to ensure it doesn't violate the current network compliance standards. In this automation, we've implemented this validation task, which enables the network team to define the compliance rules and validate that the configuration details for these new resources are in alignment with these standards. If the validation check fails, this means that the proposed cloud infrastructure configuration is not compliant, and the automation follows a path where we can view the error. If the validation check passes, that means that the proposed configurations were compliant, and the new cloud infrastructure will be created by the automation. While this automation could be run directly from Automation Catalog, the self-service portal within Itential's automation platform, you also have the ability to run automations from other external IT systems like ServiceNow. Within ServiceNow, we've created a service catalog entry called Cloud Application Deployment, where an employee can create a request for a new web server in AWS. When this request is completed, it will run the automation that we looked at just a moment ago. Let's request a new web server choosing an application name, an application type, custom port, and source address that actually violates our compliance standard. Let's name our application something generic and request a custom TCP port 23, which is an unencrypted telnet, to be open for this service. And finally, let's allow the ability for any network device to connect to this new server. When I click Order Now, a new ServiceNow request will be created. And we can now update the state to work in progress and then click Save. After this, ServiceNow will run the automation in Itential's automation platform. Let's go back into the Itential platform and take a look at the job manager. When ServiceNow processes the request, it will run the automation here and pass along the details of the proposed infrastructure. When that happens, an entry for the job will appear here. And now we can see it started. We can click on the job to see the process in more detail. As you can see in the automation detail, the task that's responsible for validating the proposed configuration for compliance came back with an error after checking the request, which means it was not compliant. We can visualize the workflow and see that the automation is waiting for some human intervention to determine what to do next. This isn't required or necessary. The automation could have moved along without manual intervention, but we put this in for the sake of the demo. So let's open up the manual task and we can see more details on the validation failure. In this case, we had a name that didn't match a standard format, a custom port that wasn't allowed, and we defined a network source that wasn't part of an approved secured network. Network teams must have the ability to create compliance guardrails and enforce them within cloud and on-prem infrastructure. By using automations that can validate a proposed configuration before it's created, network teams can be sure that any deployed infrastructure is always in compliance. Let's cancel this job and start a new request. Let's go back into ServiceNow and create a new request for a cloud application deployment. For this request, we'll make sure we fill everything out with details that are within compliance. The application name should be something identifiable, starting with ONUG. For a custom port, let's request something in a valid range. 8888 is good. And for a source address, let's only allow access from a secured host on the network. When we click Order Now, ServiceNow will create a new request. And we can open that new request and update it to the next step so that it will run our automation. We should see the active automation job run here, and we can click on it for more detail. And let's go to Visualize to get a view on where we are in the automation. As you can see, we've successfully passed the validation check this time, which means our new request was within the compliance standard set by the network team, and now the workflow is waiting for a manual task before we build the new cloud infrastructure. Again, this manual step is not necessary. The automation could have progressed along without intervention. So let's open this manual task and go ahead and approve it. The automation now continues, building the new infrastructure in AWS. The first step here is creating a new VPC. And when that's complete, it will create the new EC2 instance, which is the web server we requested. You'll notice after that's complete, the next step is to send a notification message in Microsoft Teams. So we'll open up Teams and wait for that message. And there's our notification that the automation has completed successfully and our new web server is online. The automation has a link embedded in it for the new web server, so let's click that now. And our new web server is up and running. We were able to request this new cloud infrastructure from a self-service catalog in ServiceNow, which passed the request to Itential's platform to run an automation that any network team can build and use, which can validate that the configurations for this new infrastructure are within compliance and then build it. We've demonstrated how automated validation can ensure that new infrastructure is deployed that adheres to the compliance standards. But we all know that over time, changes can occur to the infrastructure that can cause it to drift out of compliance. So how can network teams use automation to ensure that infrastructure stays compliant? Itential's automation platform supports the ability for any automation to be integrated into an event-driven process. For this part of the demo, we'll show how your team can utilize a closed-loop automation that can be triggered when an AWS event occurs, like a change in an AWS security group that could cause a service outage or create an open security risk. In Operations Manager, we can identify an event and respond to the event by running a specific automation. We already have an event defined and an automation to respond to this event. So I'll simply enable the AWS security group change event here. The AWS environment has CloudTrail enabled, and it's configured to integrate with the Itential platform to send a notification event if the AWS security group associated with this new cloud service is ever modified. If that event occurs, this automation will run. The first part of the automation determines how the security group is changed and compares it to the standard to determine if it's still in compliance. If the security group is no longer in compliance, the automation determines what changes are needed to bring the security group back into compliance. In the last part of the automation, the necessary changes are identified, and those changes are made to the security group, which puts it back into compliance. Let's take a look at our AWS dashboard. You can see our newly created VPC and web service are up and running, but let's take a look at the security group that's assigned to the VPC. The security group that was created in this request and assigned to this VPC is called SG1. Let's click on it and take a look. Notice these inbound rules here. Ports 80, 22, and 443 are part of the standard for this VPC. And we also have the custom port 8888 and the secured source address that we originally requested. Let's edit these rules and delete the web service ports 80 and 443, which will violate the compliance rules for this security group and cause an outage on our web server. If I go back to the web server we just created, we can see that we can no longer access the web page because I removed port 80 and 443 from the security group, essentially creating an outage. This change in the AWS security group has generated an event notification that will cause the automation to execute. And once it starts, it'll appear here under the active jobs. Let's click on the job to get more detail, and then click Visualize to see where we are in the automation. The automation started in response to an event that identified a change in the security group. The automation determined that the security group was out of compliance because it was missing some required rules. It determined which rules were missing, and it stopped at a manual task. Again, the manual task is not necessary, and the automation could have continued on without any intervention. Let's take a look at this task and see what rules need to be added to the security group. The automation has determined that ports 443 and 80 are missing from the security group, which are defined as the standards for this infrastructure. To bring this back into compliance, we can click Add Rule, which will allow the automation to continue and begin the process of remediation. The automation uses API integration with AWS to add the rules back into the security group. We can now see that the remediation was complete and the automation has finished. So let's return back to the AWS dashboard. And we can see that we left with only 2 rules in place. If we refresh the page, now we can see that the rules for port 80 and 443 were successfully added to the security group by the automation. As a final check, let's return to our new web server to verify connectivity. And indeed, our service has been restored and the outage is over. With Itential's automation platform, your network team can ensure their entire infrastructure remains in compliance by building automations that can respond to changes in the network and incorporate compliance checking and automatic remediation into the automation process. Thank you for watching our demonstration. We'd love for you to try Itential and you can get started for free with full access to our cloud-based platform. All you need to do is visit itential.com/get started.